"I don't want these burdens. Let the forest claim them." The millionaire's icy whisper echoed into the night as he dropped the basket. The biting wind lashed the tiny faces, the baby's desperate cries sounding like ghostly echoes in the impenetrable darkness of the forest. He turned, his heart of stone, certain that nature would do its work. But among the twisted trees, a massive figure moved, its hungry eyes glinting in the gloom. And what it found would change everyone's destiny forever. The massive figure was not the predator Arthur expected, but an imposing brown bear, whose eyes, once hungry for any trace of food in the cold night, now fixed on the small basket. A low growl escaped its throat, not of threat, but of an ancestral curiosity, as the animal slowly approached, sniffing the air. The smell of milk and of something so small and vulnerable was strange, out of place in the wild landscape. The baby's cries, which had previously seemed distant echoes, were now clear, piercing the forest's silence with a fragility that stirred something deep within the animal's chest. The bear lowered its massive head, its thick fur almost brushing the edge of the basket. Its dark eyes, which had witnessed countless seasons and the brutality of nature, now reflected a strange perplexity. It observed the two tiny beings, wrapped in thin blankets, struggling against the intensifying cold. A primordial instinct, older than any law of the forest, began to stir within it. It was not hunger nor aggression, but an unexplained need to protect that vulnerability. With a surprisingly delicate movement for its size, the bear nudged the basket with its snout, moving it closer to its sturdy body. The warmth emanating from its dense fur and warm breath began to envelop the twins, calming their shivers. The cries subsided into soft whimpers, and the babies, still unaware of the danger they had faced and the unexpected protection they received, snuggled deeper into the blankets, absorbing the warmth. The bear then began to guide the basket, carefully and patiently, to its den, a safe refuge under the roots of a centuries-old oak where the wind couldn't reach and the cold was less biting. As the night wore on, the bear remained vigilant. It did not sleep, but watched the little ones in its den, feeling the warmth of their fragile bodies. With each small sigh, each subtle movement of the babies, a new layer of protectiveness formed in the animal's heart. It kept them warm, its gigantic, silent presence serving as a shield against the darkness and dangers of the forest. Far away, Arthur the millionaire drove back to his opulent mansion. A shiver ran down his spine, but he attributed it to the night's chill, not to any pang of remorse. A cruel, satisfied smile curved his lips. Problem solved, he murmured to himself, convinced that destiny, or the forest, had forever erased the proof of his weakness and a past he wished to forget. He could not imagine that, under the pale moon, nature in its mysterious wisdom had rewritten the destiny of those he had abandoned. Dawn was approaching, and with it, the light would reveal a miracle that would shock everyone and unravel the truth behind the dark night. Dawn was approaching, and with it, the light would reveal a miracle that would shock everyone and unravel the truth behind the dark night. The first timid golden rays of sun began to filter through the treetops, painting the forest with soft hues of hope. Inside the cozy den, the brown bear still watched over the twins. Its eyes, once alert in the darkness, now reflected the calm of the morning. The babies, warmed by its imposing presence, slept deeply, small, rhythmic breaths filling the air. The furry giant, with a care that belied its wild nature, moved slightly, adjusting the basket so that the light would not disturb the tiny faces. It was a picture of unexpected tenderness, a secret kept by the forest that would soon be revealed. Not far from there, a white-haired woman with kind eyes named Ilara walked along the edge of the forest. She was known for her passion for medicinal herbs and her morning routine of gathering rare plants. Her steps were light, and her heart always open to the beauty of nature. Suddenly, A faint, almost imperceptible sound caught her attention. It was not the birdsong, nor the murmur of the wind. It was a cry, a baby's cry. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. How could there be a baby there? Following the sound cautiously, she came upon the most extraordinary scene she had ever witnessed. There was the basket, now visible in the daylight, and beside it, the brown bear, observing her with surprising serenity. The twins, rosy and seemingly unharmed, slept. Ilara, despite her initial fear, felt a wave of awe and reverence. The bear, as if understanding her intention, slowly moved away, disappearing among the trees, but not before casting a final glance at the little ones. Ilara rushed to the basket, her hands trembling. 2 babies, beautiful, perfect, and miraculously alive. The blankets were dry, and they exuded a gentle warmth, as if they had been protected by something magical. With the babies in her arms, Ilara ran to the small village. The news spread like wildfire. Shock and disbelief gave way to a wave of emotion and solidarity. How had those little angels survived such a cold night in the forest? And the story of the bear, passionately told by Ilara, seemed like a fairy tale, but it was real. People gathered, their faces marked by surprise and compassion. A legend began to be born, the legend of the guardian bear, an unlikely protector who had defied human cruelty with an act of pure kindness. Far from the commotion, Arthur awoke in his mansion, the sun filtering through the windows. He ate breakfast in silence, reading financial reports. No thought of the previous night disturbed his artificial peace. He was certain he had rid himself of the burden. Little did he know that a few kilometers away, the truth was being unveiled. His name would be uttered with contempt, and justice, driven by a miracle, was beginning to weave its web. The news, like a breeze turning into a gale, began to sweep through the small village, carrying with it the unbelievable story of the forest twins and the guardian bear. People, in their simple homes, over their morning teas, stopped what they were doing, their eyes wide, their hearts heavy. Ilara, with her soft but firm voice, repeated the morning's details to everyone she met, her hands gesturing to emphasize the bear's serenity, the baby's perfection. They were warm, as if they had been embraced all night, she recounted, and a shiver of awe ran through the listeners. The story was not just a miracle, it was an enigma. Who could have abandoned such innocent creatures to the mercy of the wild? The question hung in the air, heavy and full of indignation. In the distant mansion, Arthur finished his breakfast. The morning newspaper folded beside his untouched plate of fruit. His mind was occupied with numbers and investments, the image of the babies in the basket, already a distant, conveniently erased blur. He felt a slight irritation at the excessive silence of the house, but attributed it to the absence of his late wife, not to the absence of infant cries. The butler, a discreet man of few words, approached cautiously. "Sir, there's a buzz in the village, something about babies found in the forest." The butler's voice was almost a whisper, but the word babies made Arthur choke on his coffee. A cold pang hit his stomach. He tried to ignore it, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Meanwhile, the village was abuzz. Donna Clara, the baker, offered bread and sweets to anyone who wanted to help. Young Father Miguel, his jovial face marked by seriousness, organized volunteers to look for any clue that might lead to the parents. "We cannot rest until the truth comes to light," he declared, and his eyes, fixed on Ilara, who cradled one of the twins with maternal tenderness, conveyed an unwavering determination. The babies, a boy and a girl, were given the provisional names of Sol and Lua, in homage to the dawn that revealed them and the night that protected them. The community, united by a common purpose, transformed pain and perplexity into action. Conversations grew more intense, speculations more audacious. No one in the village had seen a pregnant woman recently, much less twins. The basket, simple and unidentified, offered no clues, but the legend of the bear, that indeed grew by the hour, inspiring hope and a sense of wonder. It was as if nature itself had rebelled against human cruelty, offering a lesson in compassion. Arthur, in his bubble of denial, felt the pressure mount. Phone calls from his associates, usually about business, now included veiled questions about the happenings in the village. He feigned ignorance, but the cold sweat on his hands and the tremor in his voice betrayed his growing anxiety. The image of the babies in the basket, which he thought he had erased, began to return, more vivid, more disturbing. The cruel smile of satisfaction from the previous night withered, replaced by a shadow of dread. He knew deep down that the web of justice, mentioned in the silent prophecy of the night, was closing in. The truth, like the morning sun, was relentless and was about to illuminate every dark corner of his soul. The community, moved by a miracle and an incessant search for answers, was about to unravel the secret Arthur so desperately wished to keep buried. The community, moved by a miracle and an incessant search for answers, was about to unravel the secret Arthur so desperately wished to keep buried. The small village buzzed with renewed energy, each resident feeling part of a greater purpose. Father Miguel, with his calm but firm voice, organized groups of volunteers who ventured into the forest's edge, not in search of the babies who were already safe, but for any trace that could shed light on the mystery of their origin. They examined the ground for footprints, rummaged through bushes in the hope of finding a forgotten object, a tiny detail that could break the disturbing silence. The village women, led by the gentle Ilara, took turns caring for the twins, Sul and Lua, offering them an affection that transcended any blood tie. Ilara, her eyes welling up with deep emotion, cradled Sul, feeling the warmth of the small body against hers. "Who could commit such cruelty?" she murmured, her voice choked, while Donna Clara, the baker, prepared nutritious broths for the tireless volunteers. Meanwhile, in the isolated mansion, Arthur tried at all costs to maintain his facade of indifference. But with each phone call he received, with each intercepted murmur from the servants about the forest babies, the web of his denial unraveled a little more. He leafed through the morning newspaper, but his eyes did not register the words. His mind was a whirlwind of disordered thoughts. The image of the basket, which he had pushed into the darkness of the night, now projected itself into his mind with frightening clarity. A cold sweat ran down his forehead, and he tried to discreetly wipe it with a silk handkerchief. "It's just the heat," he tried to convince himself, but the air conditioning was on full blast, and a shiver ran down his spine. The butler, always discreet, noticed the subtle change in his employer's behavior, the growing irritability, the vague and distant gaze. The legend of the guardian bear, in turn, grew to mythical proportions, spreading like a balm for troubled hearts. The village children listened to the story with eyes wide with wonder, and the adults recounted it with a mixture of admiration and reverence. It was a powerful reminder that kindness could emerge from the most unexpected places, and that nature, in its ancestral wisdom, often surpassed human cruelty. This story inspired everyone, strengthening the belief that the truth, however painful, would come to light, and that justice would be done. Father Miguel, in his Sunday sermon, used the legend as a parable about redemption and compassion, and the church was packed, with everyone seeking comfort and hope in his words. The search for clues, however, was frustrating. The forest, with its immensity and its well-kept secrets, revealed nothing beyond its wild and indifferent beauty. The basket was common, the blankets without identifying marks. Hopes for a quick resolution began to wane, but the community's determination remained unwavering. They refused to give up, driven by a sense of collective responsibility for little Sol and Lua. Each day, more people joined the cause, driven by genuine altruism. Arthur, in his gilded solitude, felt the net closing in around him. He heard the church bells, which before had seemed to him merely a distant and insignificant noise, now rang like a constant, hammering reminder of his guilt. His steps through the mansion became heavier, his shoulders hunched under an invisible burden. He caught himself looking in the mirror, not recognizing the man he saw reflected. The cruelty that had driven him that cold night began to transform into a poison that corroded his very soul day after day. The peace he hoped to find with the abandonment of the babies had turned into a suffocating and relentless anguish. One afternoon, as Ilara folded the twins' blankets with a mother's care, she noticed something that had previously gone completely unnoticed. A tiny, almost imperceptible tag sewn into the edge of one of the blankets. It was not a common factory mark, but delicate embroidery with the initials AM. The old woman's heart pounded in her chest, a jolt that made her catch her breath. She knew that these initials were those of Arthur's late wife, Mrs. Miranda, known for her fine and exclusive embroideries. The air in Ilara's small house seemed to thin, heavy with the revelation. The piece of fabric, so innocent in appearance, held the key to the darkest truth. Ilara pressed the blanket against her chest, her eyes wide with shock and understanding. The web of justice had finally found its first thread, strong and undeniable. The truth, which Arthur had tried so hard to bury under the darkness of his cruelty, was about to emerge, and with it, the inevitable confrontation. The village, in its incessant search for answers, was on the verge of a discovery that would shake its foundations and expose the darkness behind the facade of a powerful and respected man. Ilara's heart pounded erratically, a frantic drum in her chest. The initials AM were not just letters. They were a silent cry from the past, the signature of a tragedy now unfolding in its full, painful dimension. Miranda, Arthur's wife, was a gentle soul, known for her talent for embroidery, and those initials were unmistakable. The old woman felt a lump in her throat. How could a man who once swore love commit such an atrocity? The image of little Sol and Lua, sleeping innocently nearby, contrasted brutally with the depravity the tag revealed. The responsibility of unmasking someone so influential and of bringing to light such a cruel and profound truth weighed like a mountain on her frail shoulders. Her wrinkled fingers smoothed the embroidery, the irrefutable proof. With the blanket carefully folded, Ilara went to the church, where Father Miguel was still organizing the volunteers. The atmosphere there was one of hope and weariness, but Ilara's arrival, with her pale face and tear-filled eyes, silenced everyone. She extended the blanket to the priest, pointing to the initials. "Father, I found this on one of the baby's blankets." Her voice was a trembling whisper, but laden with a gravity that captured everyone's attention. Father Miguel took the blanket, his jovial eyes widening as he saw the embroidery. A heavy silence fell over the room as the truth began to dawn on their faces. The implications were clear. The news spread like lightning. Arthur's name, once synonymous with wealth and power, was now whispered with a mixture of disbelief and revulsion. The community, united in compassion, now united in indignation. How could a man abandon his own newborn children in the forest? The legend of the guardian bear gained an even deeper meaning. Nature had corrected human cruelty. Donna Clara, the baker, crossed her arms, her eyes welling up with anger. That monster! And to think poor Miranda loved him so much. Voices rose, adding another layer to the growing wave of outrage. As the village buzzed with the revelation, Arthur in his mansion felt the air grow heavier. The servants, once submissive, now looked at him with a strange mixture of fear and veiled contempt. The butler, serving him afternoon tea, avoided his gaze, and Arthur noticed the tremor in his hands. He tried to call his associates, but the calls went unanswered, or conversations were short and evasive. A cold panic began to settle in his chest. He walked to the window, observing the distant forest, the same place where he had left the babies. The image of the basket, which he had tried to erase, was now a burning flame in his mind. He knew that the peace he sought was an illusion, and that his facade was about to crumble. The cruelty that had driven him began to turn against him in a spiral of fear and loneliness. Father Miguel, with the blanket in his hands, convened a meeting with the village elders and local authorities. The evidence was too strong to be ignored. Justice, which had seemed so distant, now presented itself with undeniable clarity. The community, united and determined, was ready to face the truth, however painful, and ensure that Saul and Lua received the love and protection Arthur had denied them. The story of the Forest Twins, marked by cruelty and miracle, was about to have a new chapter, a chapter of redemption and the triumph of human kindness. The meeting in the church sacristy, convened by Father Miguel, was brief and decisive. The blanket with Miranda's initials, A.M., was irrefutable proof. The police chief and the social worker, with serious and compassionate gazes, agreed. The truth needed to be confronted. Saul and Lua deserved more than the cruelty imposed. Justice, driven by the village's solidarity, would begin its course. As the decision was made, Arthur, in his opulent mansion, felt the air grow heavy, almost unbreathable. The morning newspaper, with a small note about the miracle of the Forest Twins, lay ignored on his coffee table. He tried to focus on financial reports, but the image of the basket in the cold night, which he had tried to erase, returned with a disturbing clarity. A cold sweat ran down his forehead, and he caught himself looking at the distant forest, as if he expected judgment to emerge from the shadows. The peace he hoped to find with the abandonment had turned into a suffocating and relentless anguish. Suddenly, the sound of a car approaching along the long stone driveway broke the silence. It was not an associate's car, nor a delivery vehicle. It was an official vehicle, grey and discreet, yet unmistakable. Arthur's heart pounded, a frantic drum in his chest. He felt his blood run cold. The butler, with a pale face and wide eyes, appeared in the living room. "Sir, the police and the social worker." The butler's words were a blow. Arthur staggered, leaning on the window frame, his fingers white from pressure. The facade of indifference crumbled, revealing the pure panic and despair he tried to suppress. His eyes, once arrogant, were now filled with an icy fear. The moment of truth had arrived, not as a whisper, but as thunder that shattered his world. He saw the police chief and the social worker get out of the car, their expressions serious, determined. They walked towards the main door, each step a hammer blow to his chest. The cruelty of that cold night, the satisfied smile, everything transformed into bitter condemnation. The web of justice, which he thought he had avoided, now tightened around him with no escape. In the village, the news of the authorities' departure for Arthur's mansion spread quickly. An expectant silence fell over the streets, replacing the previous buzz. People gathered in small groups, their gazes fixed on the road leading to the millionaire's property. Elara, with Sol in her arms, and Donna Clara, holding Lua, felt a mixture of apprehension and deep satisfaction. The truth was coming to light, and the little ones, who had been embraced by nature, would finally have the justice they deserved. The legend of the guardian bear, a symbol of compassion amidst human darkness, would be the foundation of a new beginning for Saul and Lua, a future where love and protection would be the only truths. Arthur, alone in his living room, heard the doorbell ring. The sound echoed through the empty mansion, an omen of his fate. He closed his eyes, the image of the babies in the basket under the pale moon clearer than ever. The darkness of his soul was about to be exposed to the relentless light of truth. Arthur opened his eyes, and the world around him seemed to fade. The doorbell rang again, insistent, echoing in his mind like a funeral bell. His heavy feet slowly carried him to the door. The butler, with a heavy heart, was already moving away, leaving him alone to face the inevitable. At the threshold stood the police chief, serious, and the social worker, with a gentle but determined gaze. Arthur tried to muster his arrogance, but his voice came out weak. "How can I help you?" he asked, his hands trembling. The police chief was direct. "Mr. Arthur, we've come to discuss the twins found in the forest." The mention of the babies chilled Arthur. He vehemently denied, "I don't know what you're talking about. I have no children." The social worker extended a delicately folded blanket. "Do you recognize this, Mr. Arthur? The embroidered initials are characteristic of your late wife." Arthur saw the AM tag, a ghost of Miranda that haunted him. A shiver ran down his spine. His denial evaporated, replaced by growing panic. His lips moved, but no words came out. The police chief observed his reaction with disapproval. "We have testimonies, sir, and this blanket is irrefutable proof." While Arthur faced the weight in the village, anxiety turned to relief. Ilara, cradling Sul, who slept deeply, felt her heart warmed. Lua, in Donna Clara's arms, sighed softly. Father Miguel, with hope, observed the scene. "Justice may be slow, but it finds its way," he murmured. The women nodded, their hearts filled with a bittersweet emotion. The legend of the guardian bear was living proof that nature's kindness had risen against human cruelty. The community, united, awaited the outcome, knowing that regardless of what happened to Arthur, Sul and Lua were safe and loved by all. In the mansion, Arthur was led to the living room. The questions were blows to his armor of indifference. He tried to argue, his voice choked, but the truth overflowed. The social worker explained the legal and moral implications of his act. The unspeakable cruelty of abandoning newborn babies. Arthur felt the weight of her gaze, a gaze that contained not anger, but deep sadness and disappointment. He saw Miranda's image in her eyes, and overwhelming remorse hit him squarely. His shoulders slumped, he gave in, his head bowed, his eyes fixed on the marble. The silence was heavy, filled only by the sound of his gasping breath. The news of the confrontation at the mansion spread through the village like wildfire. There was no celebration, only thoughtful quiet. People exchanged glances, their faces reflecting the complexity of human emotion, sadness for the depravity of a man, gratitude for the miracle of the twins' survival, and renewed faith in justice. Sul and Lua, oblivious to the storm, remained the center of unconditional love. Ilara and Donna Clara looked at them with tenderness, promising a future of warmth and security. The web of justice had closed in, not only on Arthur, but on the community itself, which emerged stronger and more united, a testament to the power of compassion and human connection. Arthur, in his newly discovered solitude, felt the price of his cruelty, a burden that no wealth could alleviate. The light of truth had exposed every dark corner of his soul, and the journey to redemption, if there was one, would be long and painful. Arthur remained in the living room, the mansion's silence more oppressive than ever. The officials had left, leaving him with the echo of their words and the overwhelming weight of the truth. The social worker's gaze, laden with deep disappointment, was a harsher condemnation than any handcuff. His knees gave way, and he fell heavily onto the velvet sofa, his face buried in his trembling hands. The image of Miranda in his eyes mingled with that of little Sol and Lua, helpless in the basket. A lump tightened in his throat, and tears, which he thought had dried, streamed down. They were not tears of sadness for his wife, but of bitter remorse for his cruelty. The wealth that surrounded him, the valuable paintings, the luxurious furniture, everything seemed to mock his inner misery. He was alone, more than he had ever imagined. In the village, the news of the authorities' departure from Arthur's mansion brought relief, but also a reverent quiet. People gathered in the square, not to celebrate, but to share the weight of the revelation. Father Miguel, with a grave yet hopeful expression, climbed the church steps. "My brothers and sisters," he began, his voice resonating softly, "the truth has come to light. Arthur will face the consequences. Our focus now is the future of Sol and Lua." Ilara, pressing Sol against her chest, felt her heart heavy. Donna Clara, beside her, held Lua's tiny hand, who slept peacefully. The village women, their eyes moist, nodded. The community, which had united to protect the babies, would now unite to give them a home. Father Miguel continued, his eyes scanning the attentive faces. The social worker assured that the twins would not be separated. They need a loving home, a family that will welcome them with all affection. A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd. Ilara, with a sparkle in her eyes, stepped forward. "Father, I would like to offer my home. I don't have much, but I have plenty of love for these little angels." Donna Clara, with a gentle smile, placed her hand on Ilara's shoulder. "And I'll be here to help, my dear. They'll have all the affection and fresh bread they need." Ilara's proposal was met with gasps of emotion and approval. The other women stepped forward, offering help with clothes and diapers. The legend of the guardian bear, which had protected the babies, now transformed into the legend of a community that embraced them with the same loving fierceness. The social worker, who had remained in a corner observing the moving scene, approached Ilara, her eyes moist. "Donna Ilara, your generosity is inspiring. We will handle all the formalities for Sol and Lua to receive temporary custody in your home." She smiled, a genuine smile of hope. Justice for Arthur would be a legal process, but justice for the twins was the guarantee of a future full of love. Arthur, in his mansion, felt the cold of loneliness penetrate his bones. The journey to redemption, if it existed, seemed an arduous and desolate path. He no longer had control, nor the mask of indifference. All that remained was the naked and raw truth of his cruelty, and the certainty that the lives of the little ones, which he had tried to erase, would flourish, watered by the love of a community he could never comprehend. The days dragged on in a somber monotony. The once vibrant mansion, now silenced by the absence of its own soul, seemed like a mausoleum. The servants, once diligent and respectful, moved like shadows, avoiding his gaze, their voices reduced to distant whispers. The butler, who had served him for decades, now merely left meals on the table, without the usual conversation about the weather or business. Arthur barely touched the food. His appetite had disappeared, replaced by a constant knot in his stomach. At night, the mansion's darkness was even more suffocating. Nightmares haunted him, vivid images of the basket under the pale moon, of the muffled crying he had ignored, and of the social worker's gentle yet firm gaze. He woke up drenched in cold sweat, his heart pounding in his chest, and spent hours staring at the ceiling, his mind in a whirlwind of regret and despair. The power and wealth, which once gave him a sense of invincibility, now seemed empty, meaningless. He tried to fill the void with work, but financial reports were just blurs of numbers. And his associates, one by one, drifted away, calls unanswered, flimsy excuses. Arthur was isolated, not by choice, but by consequence. Meanwhile, in Ilara's small house, life flourished at a rhythm of love and affection. Sol and Lua, now a few weeks old, had become the center of the village's universe. Ilara's simple house was always full of laughter and warmth. Donna Clara brought fresh bread and cakes, and other women from the community took turns helping with their care, cradling the babies, changing diapers, and singing lullabies. The twins, who had come into the world under the shadow of cruelty, were now bathed in a light of unconditional affection. Sol, with her curious eyes, observed the world around her with a serenity that belied her start in life. Lua, a little more restless, found comfort in Ilara's lap, who cradled her with maternal tenderness. Ilara, her eyes welling up with gratitude, felt like the richest woman in the world. She had no material possessions, but she had the love of two small beings and the support of an entire community. The legend of the guardian bear was recounted with even greater fervor, not just as a story of miracle, but as a constant reminder that kindness and compassion always find a way, even in the darkest circumstances. Father Miguel, in his sermons, spoke of the strength of unity and collective responsibility. The community felt part of something greater, a protective shield for Sul and Lua. The social worker, who visited Ilara regularly, observed with satisfaction the loving and safe environment in which the twins were growing. She initiated the legal procedures for permanent custody, ensuring that the children's future would be built on solid foundations of love and care. The papers for temporary custody were already signed, and the formalization of adoption was underway, a process that, although bureaucratic, was driven by a collective heart. Justice for Arthur, though still ongoing, was being built in the courts, with the date of the first preliminary hearing approaching. Arthur's lawyers tried to mitigate the damages, but the evidence and the community's outcry were overwhelming. The true justice for Sul and Lua was already being done, with every hug, every lullaby, every shared smile in Ilara's home. The village, with its generous heart, rewrote the destiny Arthur had tried to seal. Arthur's life, on the other hand, became a silent testament to the price of cruelty. He caught himself looking at Miranda's photos, not with the anger or indifference of before, but with a stinging pain. Her smiling image seemed a mirror of his own corroded soul. He had lost everything: his wife, his children, his prestige, his peace. All that remained was solitude, an emptiness that no fortune could fill. The path to redemption, if he dared even imagine it, would be long and painful, an endless labyrinth of regret. The days dragged on in a somber monotony. The once vibrant mansion, now silenced by the absence of its own soul, seemed like a mausoleum. The servants moved like shadows, avoiding his gaze. The butler merely left meals without the usual conversation. Arthur barely touched the food. His appetite had disappeared, replaced by a constant knot in his stomach. At night, the mansion's darkness was even more suffocating. Nightmares haunted him, vivid images of the basket under the pale moon and the muffled crying he had ignored. He woke up drenched in cold sweat, his heart pounding, and spent hours staring at the ceiling, his mind in a whirlwind of regret and despair. The power and wealth, once invincible, now seemed empty, meaningless. His associates drifted away, calls unanswered. Arthur was isolated by consequence. The date of the first preliminary hearing hung over him like a storm cloud, each day a step closer to the abyss. His lawyers presented worried expressions, speaking of reputational damage and inevitable consequences. Arthur listened, but the words seemed distant, muffled by a constant buzzing in his ears, the echo of his own conscience. He saw himself in the mirror of the grand hall, a stranger, hollow eyes, pale skin, shoulders hunched under an invisible burden. There was no longer the gleam of arrogance, only a deep exhaustion that consumed him. He picked up an empty crystal goblet, watching the light reflect, and squeezed it so hard that his knuckles turned white, the fragility of the glass echoing his existence. He had built a material empire, but his soul was in ruins, crumbling under the weight of his actions. The truth, which he had tried to bury, now consumed him from within, a relentless flame of guilt and shame. He felt a tightness in his chest, a pain not physical, but the agony of a heart broken by remorse, a climax of his own misfortune. While Arthur drowned in his torment, in Ilara's small house, life flourished at a rhythm of love and affection that warmed the village's soul. Sul and Lua, now almost 2 months old, had become the center of everyone's universe. Ilara's simple house was always full of soft laughter and human warmth. Donna Clara brought fresh bread and cakes. Other women from the community took turns caring for them, cradling the babies with lullabies. The twins, under the shadow of cruelty, were bathed in unconditional affection, growing strong and loved. Sul, with curious eyes, observed the world with serenity. Lua, more restless, found comfort in Ilara's lap, who cradled her with maternal tenderness. Ilara, her eyes moist, felt like the richest woman, not by possessions, but by the love of the little ones and the support of the community. The legend of the guardian bear was recounted with fervor, reminding everyone that kindness and compassion always find a way. Father Miguel spoke of the strength of unity. The community felt like a protective shield for Sol and Lua. The social worker, on her last visit, brought the awaited news. Permanent custody of the twins had been approved, formalizing Ilara as their legal mother. She smiled, her eyes shining with emotion, handing the documents to Ilara, who held them like the most precious treasure. Justice for Arthur would run its course, but true justice for Sol and Lua was already being done, with every hug, lullaby, and shared smile in Ilara's home. The village, with its generous and united heart, rewrote the destiny Arthur had tried to seal, offering a bright future of light and hope. The day of the preliminary hearing finally arrived, heavy and inevitable. Arthur entered the courtroom with hunched shoulders, a pale face and empty eyes, a stark contrast to the arrogant man the community had known. He felt the condemnatory gazes upon him. His lawyers whispered, trying to mitigate the inevitable. The prosecution presented the evidence, the blanket, the testimonies, Arthur's implicit confession. The guardian bear was a powerful shadow, a symbol of kindness that triumphed over cruelty. Arthur heard the distant words, saw the image of Sul and Lua in Ilara's loving arms, a contrast that tore at his chest, a pain that no wealth could mitigate. With each mention of the cruelty, a shiver ran down his spine, the overwhelming weight of his own judgment. The judge delivered the sentence: severe public condemnation, a substantial fine for child protection funds, and the requirement that Arthur step down from positions of power in his companies, dedicating himself to a period of seclusion and reflection. His reputation was in tatters. His empire, though intact, was a monument to his shame. Upon leaving the courtroom, Arthur found no reporters but a heavy silence. The villagers watched him from afar, not with anger, but with a quietude more crushing than any shout. He felt the weight of social judgment, a condemnation that no law could impose, an isolation that would extend beyond the walls of his mansion. His gaze met Father Miguel's, who nodded with compassionate sadness. Arthur looked away, unable to bear the truth reflected in the priest's eyes. He had faced justice, legal, moral, social, and internal. The journey to redemption, he knew, began now, a solitary and uncertain path, but perhaps with a glimmer of hope, a glimpse of peace through repentance. He returned to the mansion, cold and empty, an echo of his desolation. Solitude, once a choice disguised as power, was now his only companion, a relentless mirror of his desolate soul. While Arthur faced his destiny, in Ilara's small house, life continued its course, full of light and affection. Sol and Lua, now almost 3 months old, were the personification of joy. Their soft laughter filled the rooms, and their tiny hands grasped Ilara's fingers with a strength that melted her heart. Permanent custody had been formalized, and Ilara, with the documents in hand, felt like the proudest mother in the world, her heart overflowing with endless love. Donna Clara, always present, helped with their care, her eyes shining as she watched the twins thrive. The village women continued to visit, bringing gifts, songs, and stories, each gesture another link in the web of affection that enveloped the little ones. The legend of the guardian bear was told to the babies in a low voice, a story of miracle and protection that would be part of their heritage, a tale of hope for generations. Father Miguel, visiting the house, blessed the little ones, his eyes full of gratitude for the goodness that had prevailed. The community had united to protect and love these little angels, and they were living proof that love, compassion, and human connection could rewrite the darkest destinies. Saul and Lua would grow up knowing they were loved, that they belonged to a family and a village that had welcomed them with open arms. Their future was bright, a testament to resilience and the strength of the human spirit. The life that Arthur had tried to erase flourished in vibrant colors, a garden of hope and love, a reminder that, even in the densest shadows, the light of goodness always finds a way to shine. Arthur, isolated in his mansion, found a somber routine, but now tinged with a different quietude. The fury and despair of before had given way to a deep weariness, almost a resignation. He spent his mornings in the library, no longer reading financial reports, but books on history and philosophy, seeking to understand human nature himself, the complexities of choices and their consequences. His fingers, once accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts, now turned pages with a thoughtful slowness, a gesture that revealed a new humility. He observed the garden through the window. The trees that once seemed mere adornments now revealed the resilience of life renewing itself. There was no forgiveness in his eyes, no pretense of quick redemption. There was only a bitter acceptance of his isolation, a late recognition of the emptiness his own cruelty had created, a solitude that no fortune could fill. He knew the community would never forgive him, and perhaps he could not even forgive himself. But amidst that emotional desert, a small seed of humility sprouted, a comprehension that true value did not reside in possessions, but in the human connections he had scorned. He began to make anonymous donations to orphanages and shelters, silent gestures, without fanfare, just a pale attempt to balance the scales of his soul. It was a tortuous path, but it was a beginning. Meanwhile, in Ilara's house, the lives of Saul and Lua were a hymn to hope and resilience. The twins, now almost a year old, crawled across the room, their contagious laughter and joyful babbling echoing through the walls, filling every corner with a melody of happiness. Saul, with her golden curls and curious eyes, was more observant, often stopping to study a toy or Ilara's face. Lua, with curious eyes and inexhaustible energy, explored every corner with a vivacity that charmed everyone. Ilara, with a constant smile on her lips and eyes moist with gratitude, watched them with a heart full of a love that only grew each day. She was a mother, body and soul, and each day was a new discovery, a new joy, a miracle unfolding. Ilara's simple house had become a beacon of happiness and welcome. Donna Clara, with her always fresh bread and cakes, was a dedicated grandmother, her eyes shining with pride as she watched the little ones grow strong and healthy. The village women continued to visit, bringing stories, handmade toys, and above all, unconditional love. The older children of the village played with Saul and Lua in the yard, creating bonds that would last a lifetime. The community, united by the twins' destiny, had grown even stronger, weaving an invisible yet powerful network of protection. The legend of the guardian bear was now an intrinsic part of the village's history, told to children as a modern fairy tale. A vivid reminder that kindness resides in the most unexpected places and that love can overcome any darkness. Saul and Lua would grow up hearing about the great bear that protected them and about the village that welcomed them, knowing they were loved not only by Ilara, but by an extended family of generous hearts, a support network that would never leave them. Father Miguel, in his later sermons, spoke of the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to transform tragedy into triumph, the importance of caring for one another, and of maintaining faith in humanity. The story of Saul and Lua was not just about abandonment and salvation, but about building a future based on compassion, unity, and unwavering faith in the good that resides in everyone. The village, once a dot on the map, had become an example of humanity, a sanctuary where life flourished, watered by unconditional love and solidarity. The twins, whom Arthur had tried to erase, were living proof that love is the most powerful force in the universe, capable of rewriting destinies, healing wounds, and illuminating the darkest paths. Their smiles were the promise of a better tomorrow, a vibrant testament that the light of hope always finds a way to shine. And so, life continued, a continuous cycle of hope and renewal, where the darkness of the past only served to highlight the eternal glow of light. Life continued, a continuous cycle of hope and renewal, where the darkness of the past only served to highlight the eternal glow of light. Saul and Lua, having completed their first year of life, were the personification of joy and vitality. Ilara's house, adorned with colorful ribbons and homemade balloons, had been the scene of a simple party, yet overflowing with love. Ilara's eyes, moist with indescribable happiness, followed every movement of the little ones, who were now taking their first hesitant steps, their chubby hands grasping for any support, their crystalline laughter filling the air. Saul, with her innate curiosity, pointed to every detail, while Lua, more impetuous, tried to reach the balloons with contagious enthusiasm. It was a spectacle of pure innocence and promise, a constant reminder of the miracle that life could be. The entire village participated in the celebration. Donna Clara, with a three-tiered cake decorated with wildflowers, watched the twins with grandmotherly affection, her eyes shining with pride. The older children, who had grown up alongside Saul and Lua, played in the yard, creating a joyful clamor that warmed everyone's heart. Father Miguel, with his serene wisdom, blessed the little ones, speaking of the strength of love that united that community, a love that had transformed tragedy into a new beginning. The legend of the guardian bear was recounted in a low voice, not as a distant tale, but as the very essence of that family, a living testament that compassion and protection could emerge from the most unexpected places, rewriting destiny with strokes of light. The twins grew strong, healthy, and above all, loved. Each day was a new adventure, a new discovery. Ilara, with a mother's patience and dedication, taught them their first words, their first gestures of affection. They responded with tight hugs and wet kisses, sealing a bond that was deeper than blood, forged in adversity and nurtured by the purest affection. The social worker, on her periodic visits, no longer found the need to check. She merely observed with satisfaction the flourishing of that family, irrefutable proof that Ilara's home was where Saul and Lua always belonged. The formalization of the adoption was now just a detail, for, in the heart of the village, they were already Ilara's children, an integral part of the soul of that place. Far away, in the cold and silent mansion, Arthur continued his solitary journey. The quietude that once consumed him was now a backdrop for a deeper, more painful introspection. The books on philosophy and history had given way to old diaries of Miranda, his wife. He read her notes about the pregnancy, her dreams for their children, the hope in her eyes. Each word was a stab, revealing the extent of his loss, not only of his children, but of the very essence of who he could have been. His fingers, once firm, trembled as he touched the yellowed pages, his face marked by a pain that was no longer anger, but a soul-wrenching regret. The anonymous donations to orphanages and shelters had become a routine, a daily ritual of penance. He sought neither forgiveness nor relief. He sought only a means to express what words could not, a desperate attempt to fill the void his cruelty had left. One afternoon, while leafing through a local newspaper, his gaze stopped at a small note about the first birthday celebration of the Bear twins. It was accompanied by a blurred photo of Ilara, smiling, with two laughing babies in her arms. Arthur felt a tightness in his chest, a stinging pain that made him close his eyes. There was no envy, only an overwhelming sadness, the awareness of what he had thrown away, of the love he had denied. He knew he could never go back, that time was a river that flowed only forward. But, in that moment of pain and clarity, Arthur understood that true redemption was not in being forgiven, but in accepting responsibility for his actions, and perhaps, one day, finding a way to honor Miranda's memory and the destiny he had tried to erase. Solitude was his penance, but the seed of humility, planted in his heart, began to germinate, a subtle reminder that, even in the densest shadows, the hope for transformation could still exist, a long and uncertain path, but a path nonetheless,